Hey guys, thank you for taking the time to listen. I just wanted to start off on this first video of this main series on the different party systems in the U.S. history. Right now, we're going to be focusing on the rise of America's first party system. Again, want to give special credit out there to, again, no sponsorship or anything, but The Next Realignment by Frank J. DeStefano. Really a great book that does a good job of explaining some of the critical rise and falls of all the various political systems and kind of where we're headed right now as a country. Um, I'm gonna reference a couple of quotes from that book, but I kind of want to just step in and first start on, just a quick overview of the first party system. So again, a lot of this just from Wikipedia to give some images and backgrounds. But you can see ultimately the first party system ended up being an alliance of largely southern and mid-Atlantic states, um, led by Democratic Republicans against the New England stronghold of the Federalists. But when the first two-party system was emerging, really we have to go back to the writing of the 1787 U.S. Constitution. The Constitution, obviously, it was it was created to replace the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, which had given states a lot more authority than our current Constitution. It basically left the federal government kind of at the, subservient in many ways to the states, severely limited the federal government's ability to raise taxes, raise and maintain a standing army, and to be able to, regulate commerce between the states. So the 1787 Constitution sought to resolve many of those issues, and ultimately it was ratified and became the bedrock of our current democracy as we know it today. But pretty immediately you have this clash between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, both during the writing of the Constitution and the ratification process, and then following it. This Anti-Federalist party or faction, if you will, they believe that the constitutions needed a Bill of Rights. Ultimately that got incorporated. They also believe that the new U.S. Constitution, had created a presidency that, threatened the return of a monarchy here in the United States, something that many people were fearful of, that the U.S. Constitution had just granted the president. And that ultimately, the Constitution would give so much power to the federal government that the states would not have, sufficient autonomy, and that it would erode the autonomy under the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution of the states, to, effectively create their own policies, which it did and it didn't. But yeah, this leads to, the rise of the first political parties. So in 1789, we have the rise of the Federalist Party, led by Alexander Hamilton and, John Adams and, loosely George Washington, although, often considered more of an independent. You can look reference his farewell address to see he was not a favor of two parties and saw himself as an independent, but he implemented many of the goals and the ideas of the Federalists, notably Alexander Hamilton's Funding Act of 1790, that in the Compromise of 1790 with Jefferson and Madison also led to the passage of the Residence Act that established Washington D.C. as a federal entity to house the U.S. federal government, down in Washington. But for a while, really you're just dealing with the Federalists and then the Anti-Administration Party, or more really a faction within the Washington-led government that opposed the policies of Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists. So, as time kind of passes, we see the more formalization of this party into the Democratic Republican Party, led by Jefferson and James Madison most famously in the starting in 1792. And the real divide that you know that I guess cemented the two parties was the idea that Federalists were committed to a strong, generally speaking, federal government that had the ability to impose tariffs, raise a standing army, um, you know, and ultimately, raise taxes so that the federal government would be able to fund, operations without the buy-in per se of individual states, which had existed under the Articles of Confederation. Meanwhile, the Jeffersonians, or the Democratic Republicans, believe, generally speaking, in the right of states. The idea that the U.S. should be organized under the kind of like independent yeoman farmer, as opposed to the Federalists, which believes in kind of a more industrialized, manufacturing-based society here in the United States. And that's kind of where they opposed the Republicans opposed the creation of the national bank under Hamilton. They, generally speaking, favored good relations with France instead of Britain, which the Federalists tended to be in favor of. And really, you have the two parties now trying to solve some key questions, here in our society. Again, Washington, largely like independent, did not like the factionalism and the parties that had, been growing under his first and second terms. In his farewell address, he pretty clearly dispels and tries to raise an alarm for the creation of parties and factionalism. Ultimately, everyone kind of ignores President Washington as he goes into retirement. And starting with the election of 1796, again, like here you can see, like the first two elections, Washington has pretty much universal approval, and vote. People end up voting virtually unanimously for him in his first two terms. But you can see in 1796, we have the emergence now of kind of two clear political factions with basis of support in the South for the Democratic Republicans and basis of support in the North for John Adams and the Federalist Party. John Adams wins the election. Thomas Jefferson becomes his vice president under the rules of the Constitution as it was at that time, after winning second place. And yeah, these debates, they continue. Big issue that arises is what to do with the French Revolution, and how the U.S. should, stand. Those divides that I, listed out, kind of come to the forefront, and that's how the two party systems begin to organize and, continue. And, reading here from the next realignment, basically these disagreements, they are trying to answer the following questions. So first, and I'm quoting here, could America really grow into a rich and powerful nation of commerce, standing armies, and national authority and retain its republican character? Did America need national institutions and taxes to grow and thrive, or were such things a path to aristocracy? Did a republic require the radical ideals of revolutionary France, or was that the path towards instability, bloodshed, and ruin? Each party had conflicting ideas about what the republic required, and each feared its rivals' ideas were the betrayal of the American Revolution that would inescapably lead to the destruction of the Republic of Liberty they won a war to create. These clashing of ideas would echo across American politics for a generation, close quote. So, those are effectively like where the battle lines are drawn. And as we progress into from the 1796 election into the election of 1800, you have the kind of cementing of the Democratic Republicans as the, victors, if you will, in the two-party system of the day. Jefferson arrives to, um, you know, arrives to the presidency, beating John Adams by a considerable margin, and basically has this idea that that the Federalists have been effectively crushed at the ballot box. Now we are going to have when he says we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists in his first inaugural address, you know, he was both kind of trying to deliver a unifying message, but he was also saying effectively that federalism, the ideas that it represents, had been discredited by the American populace. Um, and that, now we were going to emerge as a society, as a nation built on these Republican values of liberty, the independent yeoman farmer, cut out many of the things that Americans had rallied against, such as the passage of the Sedition Act under the Adams administration. And, you know, the Democratic Republicans, they now moved from an opposition party into leaders that actually had to run the country. And then what they basically realized, in reference to these major questions that had been raised, that I quoted from DeStefano's The Next Realignment, um, they basically realized that they could have it both ways. They could have a flourishing manufacturing base in the North built around these kind of like commercialized ideals of Hamilton. And it could have, a republic at the same time. It could have national based tariffs and taxes, but still also have, these, a kind of farmer agricultural base in rural parts of the country, and an urban, more modern, flourishing economy built around manufacturing in the North. Um, they did a deep investigation into the economic system and the financial system that Alexander Hamilton had created, and basically they found out that it was, perfect, or maybe not perfect, but as good as what could have been created at the time. Um, you know, when it came to things like a standing army, Jefferson ended up increasing the size of the military that he had so detested under the reign of the Federalists, um, in part so he could go off to, places like North Africa and battle them during the Barbary Wars, and also cognizant of the, all the violence in Europe at the time in the related to the French Revolution, that they would be able to, adequately protect the United States external borders from any kind of invasion. Um, so, the two-party system, it continued to exist, even despite this drubbing. You see in 1800, um, you know, the election of 1804 move even further over to the Democratic Republicans. And going back to one of the initial pages here, and again, all this on Wikipedia, perhaps not the best source always, but it does provide some easy information that's accessible to everyone. You can see the party strength here. Basically like an effectively like two-party system between, the emergence of the two parties in the late 1780s, early 1790s, until about, the election of 1800, from which the Democratic Republicans capture large majorities in both the Senate, the House, and start consistently winning presidential elections. So, again, the two-party system continues to endure, and, in the election of 1808, the Democrat or the Federalists continued to field, somewhat competitive candidates, still generally getting support in the Northeast and specifically the New England states. but they are effectively a marginalized in way party, in part because the Democratic Republicans had, during this first big national debate that the United States had, solved many of these debates. They realized that we could have it both ways. We could have the best of the Federalists and the best of the Democratic Republicans' ideals that they had to offer at the time. And the two parties would continue to fight it out in elections vehemently. But quoting here again from the next realignment, um, you know, quote, all that really remained to hold these parties together was political tribalism, campaign ballyhoo, ambition, habit, and inertia. After the election of 1808, really, they found that, most of the debates of the day had been um, resolved, and there was really no way to go further, to further continue on the debate in any meaningful way with regards to policy and outcomes. So that covers kind of my, the rise of the first party system, which I would kind of delineate from, the creation of the Constitution in 1787 to about, you know, 1796. The kind of establishment of this two-party system from 1796 to 1808, and then ultimately the decline, which will be the next video, of the two-party system from after the election of 1808 into 1816, which then leads into the era of good feelings that ultimately leads to the creation of the second party system in 1828. So that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Any suggestions, help tips that you would give me, as well as any other kind of video ideas, happy to create them. So thanks for taking the time to listen, and have a good day. Bye.